Hey. This is Prigsy Dearest. This is going to be a very different video from what I usually make. But, I kind of wanted to just create a situation where I'm talking and discussing my mental right now, or at least, like, what I'm thinking about, and how that applies to the channel and what's going on. And by the title, you would have known a little bit of what's going on, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit more depth. Yeah. But this is kind of weighing, this whole topic is weighing very heavy on my mind, and I kind of want to create a situation where I, as a content creator, can sit down and have talks with my community on my channel just about, what's going on, and talking about mental health topics, and having a bit of an update on how I'm doing as a creator. So there isn't, any kind of darkness between me as a creator and you guys as watchers. So we'll get straight into it. I've been feeling as a creator very soulless when making content creation, throughout the last couple of weeks, and because of something that's happened to me, which I'll talk about very soon. And I'll get into more detail what that really means, but, it's kind of at a point now where it's not stopping me from doing anything, but I think it's one of those things where I just want to talk about it. I want to be open about how I'm feeling as a content creator, although I'm not like a super big content creator, but someone who's striving to be a content creator of sorts, and how difficult it is to make content while grieving, right? For a bit of context, and a lot of my friends don't even know about this, so this is going to be a bit of a first to talk about. But very recently my childhood dog passed, and it's been a very, very horrible few days and a very horrible week. We had to put her down a couple of days ago, and it's been tough. It really has. I've my dog I kind of grew up with. I think I was 7 when I got my dog, so she's pretty old now, right? The time was getting there where this call of putting her down needed to be made. And very recently she, I believe, broke her pelvis or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but what it meant is that her 2 hind legs were heavily damaged. And in the days that followed us finding this out, we found out that because her back legs were damaged, her front legs were also getting damaged, as she had to put all the weight on her front legs to, move. And, towards the end, she was in this really horrible state where, she could barely move. We had to carry her around, and, she was very sick and just very, very sad. She was very sad. And, eventually we came together and decided, what was best for the dog was to, her quality of life had deteriorated so much in the past couple of days that, we didn't want that to go on anymore. So the decision was made, and unfortunately, I wasn't there for her last moments. Someone had to look after the house and the dogs that were still there, or sorry, the dog that was still there. But that's had a really big impact on me. And it's it's one of those weird things, grief, that, where it has such a astronomical effect on your mental and the way in which you see the world and how you see others, especially when you discuss your grief with close friends and people who aren't close, right? I think as a content creator, it affects you a lot, you know. This is one of the jobs, like an art form, where you need, or like acting, where you need to put your emotion in to make content. It's not, and it's one of those things that are very self-driven, right? So when you're going through a time of grief, it's kind of difficult to push yourself, and because of that, you're having to push yourself through a time where you also need to support yourself, and I think this kind of mental on me has come at a very, I'll use the word interesting for lack of a better word, time for me, because I'm at a point where I know I need to make a lot of content. I know I need to continue doing what I'm doing now, right? Making let's plays and doing the content I want to make, and improving on what I want to make and building up skills to be a better editor, X, Y, and Z. But I also know that I need to support myself, and that kind of juggle is so difficult, and it's what's making me feel this kind of soulless energy with content creation. I think I'll preface, this is going to be a very not wishy-washy episode, but very like, I'm just going to be discussing. I have topic points to talk about, but it's going to be all over the place, right? This is just an opportunity for me to talk, and an opportunity for you guys to just know about what's going on. I do want to preface, these kind of vids probably won't happen often, but I do want to create a platform where I'm able to talk about what's going on and, just have a discussion about things and about mental health and about my content journey. And I hope that in the future, I can still have these kind of topic points, a lot like what Markiplier does, right? Where, he still has these talking head videos. Anyway, that's a whole different thing. But, back on what I was discussing about being strong for yourself, it's, with content creation, you really need to be, especially when you're going through something really difficult, right? And I understand many people are going to say, are going to compare grief and, are going to say, well, grieving for a dog is very different, X, Y, and Z. But, grief is a very hard thing to compare, and it's kind of uncomparable, So I think for, going into this conversation and listening to this conversation, it's important to empathize with maybe, some sort of grief you have gone through in your life and how that's affected you. Because you'll probably find that the way in which I am feeling is very similar to that, even though it's, a different magnitude, sure, but it's still very much, it still has, heavy effect, it heavily affects me, And trying to be strong for yourself as a content creator is the foundation of being a content creator. You need to create content every week, and you need to keep going. Just, especially if you're doing this part-time, you need to balance this with life, right? And, it's one of those things where it isn't a job that can push me when I don't want to be pushed, or when I can't push myself forever. it's one of those jobs where you have to push yourself. You know, you are your own boss to a degree. And if you don't push yourself, no one will. And it's a really difficult juggle because, you know, everyone deals with things in different ways, but I've grown up and have been brought up and built up the idea and a mental structure of trying to uplift myself when I need to, you know, and understanding that I need to uplift myself because oftentimes people just can't do that for me. I'm not really someone who can be uplifted by others because I've lived a life that's very isolated and very, you know, not alienated, but isolated, you know. And I'm not going to go into I can go into detail wherever, but, you know, very isolated in the fact that, you know, a lot of what I've gone through, I've dealt with by myself. And I've researched on whatever condition I've gone through and whatever grief I've gone through and tried to uplift myself, because often when I was a kid, when I was in high school, from you know, intermediate to high school, I was very much alone in my own grief, even though I did have my parents as supports. You know, I'm sure everyone can relate at some point that, you know, growing up, you often don't rely on your parents for these things. And so when you don't rely on your parents and you don't have friends to rely on, you don't have, you know, teachers to rely on, you have to rely on yourself, or strangers to rely on. You rely on yourself. And by building that up, it's come, you know, nowadays when I'm dealing with grief, it's, you know, I know I have to push myself. I have to relax and I have to push myself to continue doing what I have to do. But, you know, with content creation, it often feels like I'm not putting in my 100%. And I think it's fair because, you know, I'm grieving and you're not going to get 100% out of yourself. But balance, you know, it's this kind of cycle that really doesn't help with grief, you know, of content creation. And, you know, you have videos that don't get any views, and that doesn't help either, right? And, you know, I'm not sitting here begging for views, but it's this job, much like art, much like, you know, something that has very, you know, that requires a lot of effort and time with very minimal growth and rewards. If it's something you want to do out of passion, love, when you're grieving and going through something, it's really hard to still have that passion and love and understand that, you know, although you're going through a really terrible time right now, you still have to push yourself because this is something you love doing. This is something you want to do. And it's not like a job, like a 9 to 5, where you go to work, and if this is a passion of yours, you know, you're kind of forced to get through the day. You know, you don't really have to push yourself. You just push yourself to get into to do the job and to get there to the, you know, job site, right? With content creation, you have to get yourself to the job site and you have to push yourself to finish the job and stay on schedule and do content, you know. And look, I, in fairness, gave myself a day off because I think I needed it. But even then, you know, it's kind of hard to wipe off that feeling of I need to do my job, you know. And I know this is a very, I wouldn't say unique thing, but it's kind of an uncommon thing. I know a lot of people don't, you know, it's not really, if they take a day off, well, that's kind of their day off. But I think for content creators, you know, it's very much a job where if you want to get into it seriously, you're already someone who already pushes themselves, you know, to get their job done. And I think it's so very difficult to take this time off for yourself when you need to take time off for yourself versus being realistic and making the content you want to make, right? And making content because you need to make content. You know, and I'll use an example. Very recently, I was invited into a SMP thing for Minecraft, right? Based on the kind of content I make. And it's been an absolute wonderful opportunity, but it came at a time, it's happened so very recently. My dog passed a couple days ago and I was still making content, right? And I'm in this world where I'm surrounded by content creators, and I can't, I know I need to make content here, right? Because it's full of opportunities to making content, and people are constantly doing things, and the community is wonderful, and there's content left, right, center, right? But a part of me feels so very soulless walking into this environment where I need to make this content, but I'm surrounding myself with people who are just enjoying themselves, and they're happy to make content, but I'm kind of forcing myself to do X, Y, and Z to get content, and it's nothing Jake Paul-esque where, I'm making a nuisance, but it's, I'm looking to make content. I'm building houses for reasons to make content, and, I'm setting plot points up so that content could be made, and all the while I'm grieving, and it's this weird dichotomy between, I know I need to rest and relax and probably just enjoy the space rather than build stuff within the space, but I need to do my job, and opportunities are whizzing by me as I grieve. It's so hard not to put my hands up and try and grasp at the, threads of content, because, there really is wonderful things in this world, and I've already made a lot of fun moments and great content that I'm looking forward to making. But I also know I need to take time for myself in this grieving process, but that's a lot harder to do in practice. I think as you grow to be more of an adult in your life, you realize, just not how it works. I mean, it is how it can be, and it is how it should be, but it's so hard to do that in practice, right? Even if you know that's the right thing to do. Even if you know the right thing is to take time away and, to just relax and play some video games, things. The world is always ticking around you, and there's opportunities that you have to take, and even outside of this horrible situation I'm in real life, I still have a lot of things I need to do. It doesn't stop there. I've got meetings for jobs and careers that I've got to do that are, hopefully going to go in different directions, and, I don't really have the time to stop. And this is another reason why I'm making this video. I think this is a great opportunity for me to stop, still make content, but talk and use this as a way to maybe reflect and improve going forwards. It's this cycle, and I don't really have, messages to say, but I wanted to have this discussion, as I mentioned before, to allow this platform to be something I can talk on. you know, and especially if I'm going through something, and especially if I see something happening, I want to discuss it. And I'll have the tried and true gameplay footage in the background as I talk, right? But no, still be making Let's Play content. I'll still be making some long form content. For the future of this channel, I've still got some Let's Plays that I'm thinking about doing. But, this is also a reason for me to kind of discuss some of the content I've made, and I did a sort of finale, like an extra bit of information on the last episode of the Pokemon Topaz episode I did. But I don't think I really got to the grasps of why I'm pivoting to more content and different content. I've always thought about it, but I think this event, this thing that's happened to me, losing my childhood dog, has made me feel not a pressure, but a push to do more of the content I want to make, and I do want to pivot from making 50 Pixelmon Topaz Let's Plays to, I want to try out new things. I want to do different games, and I want to build up this community, and I want to make longer form videos. And I understand YouTube doesn't really support longer videos. One has to make a lot of Let's Plays and a lot of smallish form episodes and content in order to then be able to make longer form that works, right? It's always about developing and improving, but I want to make these longer form videos, and I want to still be making shorter form. I am enjoying the Let's Plays. It's just, I'm at a point now where I just want to move on from what I'm doing. I want to improve, and I don't want to see myself months down the line still playing the same game, right? And that works in all facets of my content creation journey. I'm trying to get some more skills on how to improve my editing. Had a channel back in the day that I used, and the difference in editing from there to now is quite astronomical. But that's where I want to be. I think, in lieu of longer form content, I do understand that it's kind of a waste with a smaller channel. YouTube very much, or even just in general, YouTube very much encourages shorter form content, like the Let's Plays, and I enjoy doing them. But I don't want to let these opportunities pass, and it's, as I've talked about before with all of this content for longer form videos, I don't want to let that stuff pass in the ether. I really just want to get into these things, even if it's not going to be, it's only going to come out weeks after I want it to come out, right? It's what I want to do, and I think in this moment of grief that I'm going through, I need that, I have a point here. What does this mean for me and the channel? I guess I've already kind of talked about that, but, this soulless feeling of mine with content creation, I know it will pass at some point. I know eventually I will not get over this, but the grief won't kind of dull a little bit. I don't think grief ever fades, but I think it dulls at times. And, we'll be back on the schedule, but I just wanted to give an update, and let people know how my content's feeling. And I know for many, this is going to be kind of odd to have me talk about this. And maybe for many, it's going to be a hard thing to understand. But, you know, I do want to do this, and I do want to continue doing this. And there will be an update in weeks to come based upon this, right? I think a couple of Let's Plays will probably happen until this update occurs. But you'll notice it by, you know, a similar title and a similar thumbnail and similar content. So, you know, as YouTube likes to ram down my throat, like, comment, and subscribe, and click the notification bell so that you can get my uploads faster, right? You know, this has helped. Talking here has helped, I think. You know, and maybe I've missed a couple of points, and maybe I'll, you know, I'll add it in another video, how things are feeling. But, you know, I think this is a good wrap up here. Just with all these points, I'm gonna give a quick wrap up. You know, if you're someone out there feeling this too, I can't help you. You know, this is not a thing to help, but, you know, just know people are feeling that too. Understand people are there who feel the same way. And just keep going, you know. And I think it's very easy to say, take time off, but, you know, it's truly just keep going, you know. And maybe people would disagree. Maybe people will think, you know, they need to take time off to relax and X, Y, and Z, but, you know, just keep going, keep doing what you're doing. And maybe this is a message to myself as well, but just keep doing what you're doing, you know. And don't let things stop you, you know, even though you desperately want to, right? I think that's gonna be this video, wrapping up into the 30 minutes, I believe, something like that. And I don't want to go too far with this topic. Kind of happy with what I wanted to talk about. I did miss a couple of points, but, you know, thank you all for watching this kind of talking head video. I do want to make more of this, you know, and I want to be more upfront with things, and I want to just discuss things, and these aren't really that hard for me to make. So you know, it's not going to be every week, but every now and then I'll have one of these videos. And I also, you know, want to do this so that we can cultivate a community, you know, and a cultivated discussion, and, you know, have a community that's a lot more positive than, you know, some of the other communities out there, I guess, right? I'm not saying everyone's bad. I just want, you know, I just want discussion to be had, you know. And I want to be able to show people that, you know, there is a part of me who does like talking down and sitting. I know outwardly, like my outwardly, you know, not design, but like appearance is much more of, this guy just does stuff for content, and, you know, he's very rambunctious. But, you know, I do like sitting down and talking, and I think it's very important. And I've seen a lot of content creators do it, and I want to follow suit. You know, I think this is very important to talk about. And you know, if you guys feeling a similar way, you know, always know there's a community here to support you, and, well, hopefully a community is here to support you. That's kind of the goal, right? So maybe in the future, come back and there will be a community here for you, right? Well, thank you all for listening. Not really watching, there's not much of a watch, but listening. I've been Briggsy. I'm not going to do some sort of elated bit of outro, but, you know, if you want to like and comment, maybe even subscribe. You don't really need a comment, but, you know, subscribe if you'd like. Please do, you know, but only do if you're gonna be someone who wants to who cares about making a positive community, you know. People can subscribe all they want, of course, but if you're genuinely someone who cares about making a great community, then do subscribe. And I'll try my best to have these kind of talks and try and foster this community for not just me, but for you, you know, and for everyone else who's watching this. Thank you. You know, I've been Briggsy, and I'll see you all in the next video. Come out soon, maybe. And I'll see you all in the next update for these kind of content. Bye.